Let's go Mets. Let's go Mets. Let's go Mets. Yeah.
You gotta believe and invest with your heart. Orange and blue till Mets do us part. Spring training, oh yes, it's the start. City Field gritty till Mets do us part. Hit home runs and knock it out the park. Big Apple till Mets do us part. You gotta believe and invest with your heart. Listen to the show till Mets do us part. John from Brooklyn, Ibby reps NJ. With the other team, I don't care what your friends say. Mets fans, we focus like a sensei. Listen to the podcast Monday, Wednesday. Made a couple bad plays, but we still won. Character, yup, we're gonna build some. Are you gonna check the pod? It's real fun. Just like Mookie, I will, son. So invest with your heart. Orange and blue till Mets do us part. Spring training, oh yes, it's the start. City Field gritty till Mets do us part. Hit home runs and knock it out the park. Big Apple till Mets do us part. You gotta believe and invest with your heart. Listen to the show.
Available now on all streaming platforms. If you love the New York Mets, check out Till Mets Do Us Part. Enough rapping. Let's get to yapping.
Yo, what's going on, everybody? Welcome into another episode of Till Mets Do Us Part. We are live on YouTube. We are live on Twitter, like we are usually every single Wednesday at 5:30 p.m. Eastern Time. But for the fourth day in a row, for the first time ever, we are bringing you more coverage with our New York Mets because the winter meetings were going on. Juan Soto was signed and introduced, and we wanted to be here to celebrate it and talk about it as much as possible with all of you. So if you are tuning in live on YouTube, you know what to do. You're an official member of the show as your questions, your comments, your concerns, your jokes, your heckles, all of that stuff come in real time. We can see it. We can react to it. John Saponaro joining you all from Burbank, California. Matt Ibby Ibanez, my co-host, will not be here with us this week, or rather today, but it is all good. We have a fantastic guest. We've talked about it all week long. We've teased it online. And now, without further ado, I'm going to bring him on board so that we could get into this New York Mets conversation as Juan Soto is officially introduced just about 2 hours ago. I think he went live and did his own thing and now good enough to join us. It is Ryan Finkelstein from Locked On Mets. Ryan, you do a fantastic job. But before we talk about any of that, how you doing, man? It is good to have you back on the show, joining us and talking Mets.
Living a dream, man. Juan Soto was introduced today. I don't know about you, but just it's been a crazy week, but actually seeing that press conference in real time, it was wild. It was a pinch me moment, and it's an amazing day to be a Mets fan.
It absolutely is. Shay checking in saying Ibby was traded. No. Ibby's just maybe you want to say he's on the IL. I don't know. He's fine, by the way. He just couldn't make it for this particular show. But yeah, Ryan pinch hitting for him either way is going to do a great job. You know, Ryan, I tweeted this during the press conference, and it was fully sincere. I was watching Stearns and then Cohen talk a little bit before we even got to Juan Soto, you know, putting the jersey on and speaking for the first time as a member of the New York Mets. And I got choked up. You know, it's not the first time that's ever happened, you know, in my fandom, certainly. But, you know, I said, man, if this team ever wins a World Series, I'm going to be an absolute fucking mess. And I stand by that because there have just been these moments, and this is one of them. Said it yesterday on the show. I don't think it's hyperbole. Outside of the championships, this is the biggest moment in New York Mets history for what it represents, not only to the Mets franchise, not only to the Mets' chances of winning on the field, of course, but also just to the landscape of New York baseball and Major League Baseball at large. The Mets have truly kicked down the door of LOL Mets. They've buried little brother. I know Andy Martino said that on the introductory press conference from the studio. A lot of people have echoed that sentiment. I know Yankee fans don't want to hear that. Oh, well, you know, you win 20 more championships, then we could talk about being not little brother. But when you go toe-to-toe with the Yankees the way that they did, you take the player away from them who's on a Hall of Fame path, you know, in the prime of his career, he chooses you instead of choosing the Yankees. You outbid the Yankees. To me, all of that narrative was already on its way to being dead, but now it's officially dead and buried. LOL Mets is gone. Little brother is gone. Do you agree?
Absolutely. I was talking about this a lot on my show right after the press conference. I had the same feeling, like this day, it's been a buildup. This is 4 years in the making to get to this Juan Soto day. And it starts with Steve Cohen buying the team, and then, Lindor coming on board, getting him to sign, and then you bring in David Stearns to give you that steady hand on the wheel. This is that sort of line in the sand. It's almost like before Christ, after Christ, before Soto, after Soto. Like, I feel like the entire franchise changes from this moment on, and we'll see exactly how far the Mets can go as far as being a championship winning organization when they finally get to that point. We don't know if it's definitely going to happen, but it really is a different era of Mets baseball. And I think more and more over time, the LOL Mets, all that stuff should start to fade. I think the national media might take some time to catch up, but I feel like as a Mets fan, like a lot of that angst should be gone. And then I know I'm not sure how much you get this from interacting with the community, but I get it a lot where, and I don't want to say it's always the older Mets fans, but like that constant pessimism that is always there. And I feel like sooner, the more of these moves that happen, the more you can start to strip that away and just realize like this is a completely new Mets team, the one that certainly I grew up with.
Yeah, look, I mean, I try not to. I will certainly take on people when I think that their takes need to be taken on. But I don't like to tell people necessarily how to fan. But the caveat that I will add to that is that you're not a better fan than me because you're pessimistic. And that's the one that I always stand on, because I think a lot of Mets fans, and I'm also a Jets fan in my football life. So I think a lot of fans of those two teams in particular think, oh, I've been around longer and I've been hurt more, so therefore I'm better. It's honestly, it's the Joe Benigo fan of it all, where, you can sit there and go, look at how much I've had to endure. That makes me better at this than you. And it's like, first of all, it doesn't. Second of all, I don't know exactly how old you are, Ryan. I'm 38 years old. I was born about a week before the Mets won the World Series in '86. So I was alive for it, but I didn't see it, not in any kind of meaningful way. So I've lived through, up until Cohen bought the team, basically a team that has been owned entirely by the Wilpons, and a team that has been mismanaged by the Wilpons, and a team that, was run by the Wilpons, who were, after Madoff, cash poor with regards to running a baseball team. So not only were they inept, but at times they were broke. I know we've talked about that, and we talk about, the joke of all of that, but I don't necessarily think that somebody who's been a fan for 20 years more than that has had it worse, right? I mean, that's crazy.
Yeah, I mean, I'm 29, so I've lived through, I think, similar. You probably got to enjoy Piazza more than me, and that's about it.
Yes,
but,
exactly.
It's been the same thing, and I'll tell you, I started my show in 2019, and so it was basically the Brody Van Wagenen era, the final vestige of the Wilpons. That last year and a half was the first couple years of my show. And it was always the pessimism and just pointing out how pathetic the Wilpon era of Mets baseball was. And there was always another sideshow, another drama. And I've said it on my show plenty. It was my 25th birthday, September 14th, that it was announced that Steve Cohen was going to buy the New York Mets. It's the greatest birthday gift I think I will ever get. It has completely changed everything. It has completely changed what being a Mets fan is. And it leads to a day like today where you sign a player for $765 million, a guy that this year, the contract figure that came out, the fact that he's getting $46 million in salary this year, the way it broke out, where in 2025 he's going to get over $121 million. It's absurd, but
yeah, it's great. But listen, that's how. Look, I know a lot of Yankee fans are salty. And I have a lot of friends, as I'm sure you probably do, that are Yankee fans, that are good fans. And there is bad eggs in every fan base. There's plenty of bad Mets fans. There's plenty of bad whatever fans. But a lot of people that have switched gears right away and been like, oh, what an overpay. What an overpay. Listen, first of all, you overpay in free agency. That is what free agency is. Free agency is dictated by supply and demand. It is free market. It is where these guys are valued, how they are valued at the time of their free agency, their ability, their age factors in, previous precedent factors in, but it becomes a supply and demand situation. So, everybody's going to be an overpay in that sense. And on the flip side of it, these guys are the top 1% of the top 1% of baseball players in the world. When you're talking about, the Sotos and the Otanis and the Bryce Harpers and guys like that, you have to be elite to even make it to the major leagues. And then these are the guys who are the elite among the elite. So they are going to make a tremendous amount of money, and they should, because they've dedicated their entire life to this. And the flip side of it, and this is what I've been saying lately with regards to Steve Cohen, is that, dude, it's not Ryan's money. It's not John's money. It's Steve Cohen's money. He's got $22 billion and climbing. He's 66 years old. He's effectively retired from his day job at .72 to just run the Mets. He's set for life. His family is set for life. I don't care how much money he spends. Now, there's smart team building. You have a platform. You do a great job on Locked On Mets. We like to think that we do a good job here with Till Mets Do His Part. We understand that no money pit is bottomless and that you have to be smart about how you build a team. But there's John, who has this platform that's like, hey, maybe I don't want to give 8 years to Corbin Burns. I don't think that's a prudent deal. But then there's John, the fan, who says, listen, if you want to give 8 years to Corbin Burns, I certainly don't care, because I just want my team to be as good as it can be for as long as it can be, as consistently as it can be. And I think sometimes you have to separate those two parts of yourself. I don't know if you run into that when you do your show versus your fandom.
Yeah, I mean, what you're saying 100%, like, it's not our money. And I always love when people are so concerned, like the idea that the Mets can't sign Pete Alonso now on top of Juan Soto because of how much they're investing on Juan Soto. If Steve Cohen wants Pete Alonso to be a Met for the rest of his career, let him be a Met for the rest of his career, and let's just enjoy it. I think this is a situation here where the investment that Steve Cohen is making in the Mets, it's a legacy play. This is long term. He is going to go down remembered a lot more for being the owner of the Mets than for .72. Like, this is it completely, it isn't a legacy defining signing even to get a guy like Juan Soto, and knowing if this works and the Mets win multiple championships, for one, the franchise is going to quadruple in value anyway. So, I mean, if you're talking about that as far as an investment, it's a wise one, but this is just about wanting to win. And I am not going to at all tell Steve Cohen to not spend. I mean, this is what we were all hoping for when he bought the team, and it's happening. Let's enjoy it.
Absolutely. My co-host, Matt Ibby Ibanez, couldn't be here live with us, like I said, in the open. But, listen, he's got 2 kids at home. He's a busy, busy dad. But he is here in the comments right now. And he said Steve Cohen made $211 million in stocks since he signed Juan Soto. That's something that's been pushed around Twitter over the last, few hours today. And look, I don't know exactly, where that notion comes from, if it's 100% true, but the fact of the matter is Steve Cohen's got billions of dollars. Money makes money. When you're at the point of wealth that he's at, money just continues to come in. And so whether it's exactly 212 million, Ryan, or it's 158 million, or it's 258 million, whatever the number is, Steve Cohen is making money constantly because wealth begets wealth, especially at the level that he's at. So, it's not hyperbole to say, the Juan Soto contract is paid off in a month. You know what I mean? Like, this is what we're talking about. And I know it's ridiculous. And in my personal and private life, it's not a political show. It's not even a social show. I'm fairly anti-billionaire, as it were, because of what it means for society at large. But if there are going to be people with this amount of wealth, the way that you can turn around and make other people happy, make an entire section, millions of people happy by owning the Mets and operating at a loss, which he's done as the owner of the Mets since he bought the team, just to make the Mets better. I mean, look, he's not curing cancer with this money, but it's kind of the next best thing you could do with regards to it's a forward, it's kind of paying it forward in a way. You're making people you don't know, millions of people, happy by reinvesting your money in the Mets.
The amount of trauma that he is healing for Mets fans around the world, really. Yeah, I mean, I've always said, like, there's no world, even when things went as bad as they possibly could in 2023, where I could ever really criticize Steve Cohen, because he is giving it all for the Mets fans. Like, he is pouring all of his resources into every facet of the Mets organization to take them, as he talked about today, to being that world-class, elite, premier franchise that he wants them to be. And yes, they might make some bad investments along the way. maybe they shouldn't have given Scherzer and Verlander the money they did, but also at the same time, they won 101 games with Max Scherzer. It just didn't work. And the reality is what Steve Cohen allows your franchise to do is you don't feel those mistakes anymore. Like, yes, the Mets took a step back in 2023 because it was a wise thing to do to improve their farm system. But the next year they're in the NLCS. And yes, they didn't invest in the market last year, but that's because that was a market that wasn't worth investing in. You're seeing a better free agent class this year, and you see a once in a generation free agent like Juan Soto. All of a sudden, here comes that pocketbook again, and it's not going to stop with Soto. The Mets are going to keep on adding too.
Yeah, I completely agree with that entire sentiment. I do think there's some truth to the rumor that's largely unsubstantiated that, the Mets kind of called Ohtani's people and we're just like, listen, man, we're not doing this. We're trying to go full bore to the Dodgers. And apart from him, you're right. Like there was no one else and Yamamoto, of course, which, right player at the right time in terms of age and upside and stuff and ability, especially if you're going to invest in the pitching market. One of the things that I've sounded like a broken record on this show all offseason is you get better ROI in the position player market than you do in the pitching market, specifically in the starting pitching market. Once these guys hit 30 years old, the best way to have starting pitching of an ace level is to either draft and develop it or to identify it early and get it from another team. Kind of like the way the Mets, did earlier in, before Cohen's tenure with Zach Wheeler. You identify a player that you think can grow into something, you go out and you get him. Obviously, Steve Cohen didn't own the team at the time, so he has his best years with the Phillies after he's allowed to leave. But that's the kind of move that you're looking to make, getting a Sasaki in here if you ever could pull it off, going in and trying your best, even though you didn't match up great, to get a Garrett Crochet because of the potential upside, all the money that they would have invested into Yamamoto, things like that. Jump back into the comments really quick. Ibby saying his portfolio, Steve Cohen's that is public knowledge for consumption. He has made a quarter of that deal back already. It's a great day, Mets fans. So I didn't know that. There you go. $211 million since the Sunday that he signed Juan Soto. Jeff F on Twitter saying, I was in high school the last time they won the World Series. We have all suffered, talking about, the pessimistic Met fan thinking that they have a little bit more ownership because they've been around a bit longer. I think that's a good point. And then Shay saying, I love Soto's comments of paying it forward. Speaking of that, to the Dominican Republic, setting up a baseball academy, giving other people opportunities as well. Ryan, I did think that was a big thing, as Mets fans of baseball, we don't this doesn't mean a ton to us as a 1-for-1, but the one thing I always try to say on the show is they're human beings. A lot of times people act like this is MLB The Show. They act like it's fantasy baseball. Players aren't allowed to be tired. They're not allowed to have families. They're not allowed to have other interests. And I think this was a great moment talking about you never know who the next Juan Soto is going to be, the next Bryce Harper, the next Steve Cohen, even the next Scott Boras. Like, these people have to come from somewhere, and to pay it forward the way that he's talking about doing, I think is a beautiful thing.
Absolutely. I think we saw a lot of humanity in Juan Soto today with his answers. And yes, obviously that final contract figure meant something. Of course, he got the biggest offer from the Mets, but he wasn't talking about just how much money he was making. He talked about that feeling of family with the Mets and how much they really stressed that to him. I think that means a lot to Juan Soto. It's clear how important his family is to him. He talked about how he believes his family's going to have a blast with him being on the Mets and the way they're going to be treated. And it shows you a player that, clearly has a good foundation under him. And I think he's going to do a lot of really good things with the money, which is a really cool thing. I think one of the benefits, or one of the positive impact of David Stern since he came in, is it does seem like the Mets are trying to really focus on that the positive thoughts, bringing in positive people, a positive work environment. And you saw that with Carlos Mendoza and Francisco Lindor, Brandon Nimmo, the environment they built in that clubhouse this year. And I don't think it's a surprise or an accident that the Mets had so much success with that infrastructure in place. And I think Juan Soto seems to be like a perfect fit to join that.
I totally agree on that front. We had Lori Rubinson on from WFAN on Monday. Obviously she's talks sports professionally. She's out there doing her thing on the radio every Sunday night. But she's also a big Mets fan. And she, like us, has to separate sometimes the fandom. Because she has to talk more about the Yankees than even we do, right? On a New York City radio station. But she talked about the fact that she truly believed that the escalators in the deal that get the contract up to 805 and the difference in the signing bonus, 15 million more from the Mets than the Yankees. She didn't think it was as much the money as it was what you just described, this family environment. I know a lot was made over, giving the suite away for free versus the Yankees never set that precedent and they didn't want to change. Where do you stand on, look, he was always going to go to the highest bidder, and he did go to the highest bidder. We talked for months on this show that if the Mets wanted him, they were going to have to outbid everybody, but they didn't outbid the Yankees rather by that much. And I do think there is something to be said here about what the Mets are building, what the Mets already have, and the atmosphere that they're going to continue to build, and Juan Soto being a part of that. Where do you lie on that? Like, how much of it do you think that helped push it over the edge versus just the money, which of course we all know he was going to take?
You've seen a lot of people be critical of Juan Soto and basically just say, oh, it was just, he was going to go to the highest bidder. I forgot who it was. Someone said, like, was it Michael Kay that said if the Marlins gave him $850 million, he'd be a Marlin? Like, I don't buy any of that. Ultimately, the Yankees were $5 million off the Mets offer. Now, the structure of the Mets offer was clearly more beneficial to Juan Soto, but if he really wanted to be a Yankee, he would be a Yankee right now. I honestly believe he wanted to be a Met. Now, Scott Boras did his job and got him a great deal, but I truly believe when Scott Boras talks about the Supreme Court of Soto, all the family members that are helping him make this decision, this was a family decision where the Soto family felt more comfortable with the New York Mets and entrusting them to, be the place that he's going to spend the next 15 years of his life, the rest of his career, than going to the Yankees or any other team. I absolutely think this was about choosing the Mets. I don't think it was just, the Mets were the highest bidder. If it really was about that, they always could have gone back to the Yankees and tried to squeeze more out of the Mets. I think they came to the decision they wanted to be a Met, and then the contract sort of worked itself out.
Yeah, and look, I know there was a lot being made about the Yankees getting the final opportunity to match, and there was, even Cashman kind of debunked that. But it was put out there that not that the Yankees would always get sort of the right of last refusal in this situation, if you will, but I think there was a lot made where they brought the deal back or the Yankees made their deal and they were like, this is it. This is as high as we're going to go. And I think that speaks volumes because, look, if Hal was convinced that he could get Soto and Soto just wanted to be back with the Yankees, I think whether the semantics of it are, hey, we went back to the Yankees to give them an opportunity to match or beat the deal or whatever, or we let them know straight away this was going to be the dollar amount you'd have to hit once it got to a certain point for him to come back. I think to your point, he still would have been a Yankee. You don't think the Yankees would have spent $5 million more to lock him up or change the structure of the deal slightly so that it would have been 15 years instead of the 16? Like that's kind of where my head's at, where the proof is kind of in the pudding, regardless of which way you believe. The money was always going to get it done, but I think there's so much there where he actually just chose where he wanted to be.
Absolutely. I mean, if there was one last phone call to Hal and it was, hey, you can have Juan Soto, here are the terms of the agreement, and you're already stretching yourself that far out, is it really that much of a concession to say, all right, fine, we'll do 765 instead of 760. We'll change the average annual value by a couple $1 million. We'll throw in that escalator. Heck, if anything, if you're the Yankees, you could think, well, we can put that opt-out clause in, and then we have Juan Soto for 5 years. And then if he opts out, we got 5 years of Juan Soto to line up with Aaron Judge's prime, and then they could have washed their hands of it if they wanted to. Like, I don't think that the contract was so drastically different that if Juan Soto wanted to be a Yankee, that it wouldn't have gotten done. Ultimately, it was a long process, and I think the Soto family came to that decision. The Mets are the place that he wanted to be. This is the franchise that he believes in. He believes in the future of the New York Mets. And that alone says so much about where this team is going and that change of perception now on who the Mets are moving forward.
Yeah, I think that's all just a great point in terms of what he was looking for, what he is, and not just him, his family, what they were looking for going forward, what he could bring to the table. And I do think there's a little bit of, this was not brought up, and I don't think anybody would ever say this publicly, right, from the Soto camp or whatever, but I've said it on this show that he meant more to the Mets than he did to the Yankees. We see the Yankees pivot. Now, they didn't pivot exactly in the way that I would have with regards to giving a crazy expensive deal to Max Fried, but you can look at the Yankees spending that money in other places that would make their team better. Their team was top heavy last year. It was Soto and it was Judge for the bulk of the regular season, with their pitching doing what their pitching does, and they have good pitching. Garrett Cole is still there. I understand. I acknowledge all of that. But it was two guys on the offense. And then when it came down to the playoffs, it was really Soto and Stanton. And it was Judge who took a bit of a backseat because he didn't have a terrific postseason. And yes, they made it to the World Series, Ryan, but it wasn't enough. And I've said on this show a million times, if the Mets, I don't care if you think it's a good idea for them to do it or a bad idea. If the Mets sign Juan Soto, could they then turn around and sign Pete Alonso? Yes. If the Mets sign Juan Soto, could they turn around and sign Alex Bregman? Yes. If the Mets sign Juan Soto, could they have turned around and signed Willie Adames before he got the deal? Yes, they could go and they can make any other move and more moves on top of that with $170+ million coming off the books. The Yankees have $30 million in AAV invested in Judge, $30 million in AAV invested in Giancarlo Stanton, $30 million in AAV to Garrett Cole, $27 million in AAV in Rodon, which is a bad deal. They've got $18 million on DJ LeMahieu, which is a bad deal. I know it's just 1 year left, but another 18, I think, in Marcus Stroman, another bad deal. And then they turn around and they give whatever, $27 million to Max Fried. I know that was after the fact of Soto, but I just don't see how the Yankees could have committed this money to Soto and then made their team markedly better. The whole push would have been, well, look how good it was with Judge and Soto last year. We're running it back and we'll fix other pieces around there. They're always going to get people. They're always going to invest money, but I don't think in a meaningful way if they get Soto.
No, Soto would have been the move. And ultimately it shows you how good Juan Soto is that they were willing to invest this much money in him potentially and have made it really hard on their front office to navigate around it. Obviously, you don't know exactly what the structure would have been. They probably could have made it so that in the early years when Stan's still getting paid, they maybe backloaded it and they would have tried to do a lot of financial gymnastics, but they would have put themselves in a really compromising position because they don't have the ability to just run $300 million payrolls every single year like the Mets do. At some point, they have to dip below the luxury tax line maybe and reset, or at least down the top line. The Mets, they would like to get under that top Steve Cohen tax, but if it means the difference between getting the player that will give them a chance to be a contender on a given year, Steve Cohen's always going to say yes, at least until the Mets win a World Series. Until then, I think there's really no limits to the spending you're going to see from Steve Cohen. And if you're Juan Soto, I think that's what you're buying into. You see that this is an owner that is so hungry to win that you know there's going to be other players around you. And that's why I still believe that Pete Alonso is coming back, because I just think if the biggest concern that Juan Soto had was protection in the lineup, and Scott Boras is Pete Alonso's agent too, I just can't imagine a world where Pete Alonso's future was not discussed at some point in the negotiating process for Juan Soto, especially when we look at the class and the other options. Like, there's not really, outside of maybe Bregman at this point, or like a Teoscar Hernandez. And even then, I don't think there's another bat in this market that would get Soto as excited as just Pete Alonso coming back either.
Yeah, you and I have been in lockstep with regards to that. Just everything I see on Twitter, whenever I listen to your show, I've been all in on Pete coming back. I've said on this show, not only since the offseason started, I've said it since like May. Looking forward, the Mets offseason started with getting Soto, or at least trying to get Soto, and then bringing back Alonso. Because if you get Soto, yes, he effectively replaces Alonso. I understand that. But then you open up another hole in your lineup at first base. Even if Soto hits the 40 home runs that you expect Pete to hit, well, the two of them together, you would expect 80-ish home runs from the two of those guys, maybe even 90 home runs from the two of those guys. And I think you're asking a lot, even though I love his bat, of Mark Vientos to come back in his sophomore year, do everything he did in his first year while moving positions and effectively replacing Pete Alonso, whether or not Soto is here to take the pressure off of him. To me, that's a bad play. We'll talk a little bit more about that in the second half, which is coming up in a moment. Everybody who is rocking in the chat, we appreciate all of you. If you're watching live on YouTube, you can go ahead and hit the like if you like what you're seeing and what you're hearing. And don't forget to subscribe to the channel so that you never miss an opportunity to know when we're going live, especially during weeks like this when we do 4 shows instead of 1. This is usually a once a week type of proposition here at Till Mets Do Us Part, powered by the Brella Sports Network. But here during the winter meetings, with everything going on with Juan Soto, if you subscribe and you turn the notifications on, you'll never miss an opportunity to know when the show is going to drop, and especially know when the show is going to be live, so you can become a full-fledged participant in the show. And you know what? Just want to shout out one person in the chat in particular. It's Hunt Tough, who has been spreading all kinds of venom like this. You overpaid for a DH and you have no aces, and telling us to stop yapping. I appreciate that, because Ryan, we have it set up here where you have to subscribe in order to comment. So I appreciate the engagement. It's weird to tune into a Mets podcast and a Mets live stream if you don't want to hear about the New York Mets. So thanks for tuning in. We appreciate it very much. Let's head into the break on that. When we come out, we'll continue talking about Pete Alonso, which we just touched on. We'll also talk a little bit about the pitching market, because the Mets do need to get back involved in the pitching market, specifically starting pitching right now after losing out, if you want to say it, as far as the Garrett Crochet sweepstakes are concerned. If you're sitting here and you're watching live and you're like, I don't want to sit through a break, don't worry. It is just a quick 30-second ad spot that we need for the audio version of this show. It's John Saponaro. It's Ryan Finkelstein coming in this week from Locked On Mets with Till Mets Do Us Part. We will be right back. Yo, just like that, we are back with Till Mets Do Us Part, live on YouTube, live on Twitter. John Saponaro flying solo in a way this week. I've got Ryan Finkelstein from Locked On Mets here with us this week, talking about everything that just happened with the Soto press conference. And we're going to get into everything that just wrapped up with the winter meetings ending yesterday. I think you tweeted about how the winter meetings feel too short now, and I totally agree. I want the winter meetings to go till Thursday. I think ending on Wednesday just feels weird. Before we get back into the conversation, Ryan, if people aren't familiar with your work, they should be. But where can they find you? Where can they listen? All that fun stuff. Please, you do a lot of great work, and I want you to plug it here on our platform.
I appreciate that. So I do Locked On Mets 5 days a week, sometimes even more when we get some crazy Mets news. You can find it on YouTube or wherever you get your podcasts. And then also I write for justbaseball.com, so you can find some of our written stuff over there at justbaseball.com. Find me on Twitter at Finkelstein Ryan.
That's great. He's a fantastic follow as far as Mets Twitter is concerned as well. Even if you just want to get those quick shots in and, your quick stream of consciousness thoughts and, the Locked On Mets is great. I actually listened to your most recent episode this morning, kind of preparing for the conversation that we were going to have. Before we get back into that conversation, just want to shout out our friends over at Independent Safes. Independent Safes has been a great partner of Till Mets Do Us Part here for the last several months. I think going on 6 months or so. And they've got you with free shipping when you spend over $99. And I got to be honest with you guys, you're buying safes. They're heavy. They cost a lot to ship. And spoiler alert, you're going to spend over $100 if you're buying one. So basically, no matter what you buy from Independent Safes, they're going to hook you up with free shipping. Tell them your friends over at Till Mets Do Us Part sent you. So, Ryan, let's get back into the Pete Alonso conversation, because this has been something, like I said in the first half, you and I have been on for the entirety of the offseason and before. Look, we're both adults. I don't want to say that we're like fanboys here. We both have platforms. We both just like Pete Alonso for what he brings to this team. And you already alluded to it, that there's not a lot of options outside of Pete Alonso, especially when you start to factor in qualifying offers. I already said I don't want to move Mark Vientos off of third base. So to me, that limits what you can do. Other people feel a little bit more comfortable with just sliding him over to first and opening up the market to third baseman as well. But when you look at just first baseman, it's ugly, man. I don't like Christian Walker. He's 4 years older than Alonso already. He was a late bloomer in a hitter's haven. He's already proven to be less durable than Alonso. Yeah, you get him for a shorter term deal, but you're going to be paying him till he's 38 years old on that shorter term deal. If I was going to go in any other direction, if Alonso doesn't want to come back or you can't make the money match up, I would rather go stopgap player, short-term option, Carlos Santana on a 1-year deal than even entertain the likes of Christian Walker. I don't like Bregman. I think his last really great year was 2019, which was Alonso's first year. So I don't love the option. I don't want to trade for Arenado. To me, it makes so much sense to just reinvest in Alonso. You allow him to just be the guy that he is really destined to be, which is a masher who's going to hit a lot of home runs and knock in a lot of runs. And I also think that the negatives on his defense are a little overblown. And I think the negatives on his body type not aging well are a little overblown, especially when you factor in the guy doesn't miss games, played in 175 games last season. So your thoughts on Alonso, where else the Mets could go, should go if it doesn't work out?
I'll say, I was always on board with re-signing Pete Alonso. I mean, for years now. I started to waver a little bit. And when I wavered was, funny enough, game 3 of the wild card when Pete Alonso dropped that pop-up. And it was the first time I was like, man, like, can Pete Alonso really deal with the pressure? Well, we learned like 15 minutes after that, when he hit the Mets into the next round of the playoffs with that monster home run off Devin Williams, that, yeah, he can be that guy. And he was that guy throughout the playoffs. I honestly think if you re-sign Pete Alonso and you have him locked in, he knows he's a Met for the rest of his career, I think you're going to get the best version of Pete Alonso again. I think the last 2 years have weighed on him, that uncertainty. We clearly know he wants to be a Met. And like you said, the alternatives just aren't there. At third base, I don't see it. Like you said, I don't see Bregman as an ideal fit for the Mets. I could be talked into Arenado, but only because it's not going to cost anything but money. But I wouldn't love it. I think your lineup's taking a step back. Mark Vientos has more value at third base than at first base, 100%. He's got a cannon of an arm.
You lose his best asset, which is his arm. Defensively, his best asset is his arm, and it gets a little wasted at first base. I do think his ceiling would be higher as a defender at first, because I think it's quote unquote easier to play. I think he could get to a significantly above average first baseman with his work ethic. But I think that he's already made great strides at third, and he did it on the fly, Ryan. He did it just, hey, you know what? We're not sure what's going on with Beatty. Start playing third base every day at AAA. He gets called up. It's all up to him. He works with Lindor. Like, I don't think he's going to regress at third base at this point. I think he's going to get better. I don't think he'll ever win a Gold Glove, but I think his inability to play defense was overblown by everybody.
Yeah, you know what? And I mean, I remember when he was a prospect, and you did watch the tape. It was bad, but at the same time, you never know until you get a player out to the show what they're actually going to be. Because I think, and he talked about it, like Lindor really helped him with the focus aspect of it. And I think once you get there, the competition spikes to a level where if you're a gamer like Vientos, we saw him really make a lot of strides. And so, yeah, his value is so much higher at third. And I think if you just think about combinations, third base, first base, the power the Mets could have if they just keep Alonso at those positions, there's only a few teams that have it. There's the Braves with Olsen and Riley. This past year, Jose Ramirez and Josh Naylor were the duo that led the league in home runs. I think Pete Alonso and Mark Vientos were second. So I really think that makes the most sense. I will say, if they are going to go the stopgap route, like Josh Naylor would be a guy that I would definitely have circled as a trade candidate. But I really think Pete Alonso is coming back.
Yeah, it's funny you say Vientos and Alonso were second in the league in terms of first base, third base tandem for power output. And that's with Vientos basically not playing for 6 weeks to start the season. He wasn't a part of this team. And that's with Alonso having, one of his worst years in terms of power output. I'm with you. I think it's not an indictment on a player for me if they don't have this unbelievable walk year. Yes, It looks good. It feels good. It's fun to watch. Guy bets on himself. He does the Soto thing, turns down $440 million at 23 years old. And then over the next 3 years, outside of like a quick little, downturn with San Diego, he gets better over those 3 years than when he turned down that money. Yeah, he bet on himself. He did the thing. That's great. You want to have a walk year like Aaron Judge. You always want to do that. Some guys aren't wired that way. It doesn't mean that they're lesser players. It doesn't mean that they're scrubs. I think it weighed on Alonso because I think Alonso wants to be here. I think Alonso likes being a Met. And I also think, and I think you and I may have talked about this on Twitter before, where sometimes you do have to do stuff on vibes. And I know that that's not necessarily great team building and baseball team building or whatever, but he means a lot to this franchise. I think he's the best power hitter they've ever developed. That includes Darryl Strawberry. He's going to break every record power wise and probably RBI wise that the Mets have ever had. And he's not going to do that on another team. He's simply not going to mean that to another team. And I think it means something for the Mets to have a guy who hits 500 home runs for them. I know Gary Sheffield hit his 500th home run for the Mets, but I think it would mean something for him to be here. And if that means a couple extra $1 million or an extra year, to me, I don't think that's a big deal. I really don't.
I think the market also is going to help the Mets in that regard, because if we were talking about Pete Alonso getting an 8-year contract worth $275 million, I might pause and say, okay, like maybe you should hold on that and not invest that way. I don't think he's going to get that level of a deal anyway. And like you said, he has built so much equity with this franchise. It does mean more for the Mets this time than it'll mean for any other team. I talk about on my show, like I have my nephew who he's just learning to play baseball. When he hits the ball really hard, he like calls it a Pete Alonso. And I feel like that's something that a lot of young Mets fans who have grown up with Pete, like there's so much value that comes with that. Kind of another connecting thread. If you look at Mark Vientos on Twitter, he's got the number 5 in his name there, because Mark Vientos grew up a Mets fan. And just like me, who put 5 in like every email I've ever had, David Wright has that level of an impact. Pete Alonso is the same way. There's certain players that have a connection with the fan base that you can't put a price tag on. And Pete Alonso is one of those guys. He should be a Met for the rest of his career. And part of the Steve Cohen era has been not having to say goodbye to those guys like you might have in the past with the Wilpons. You have the ability to bring them back. And I feel like it's honestly going to be a pretty reasonable deal, all things considered. If they can get Pete Alonso on a 6-year deal and he lines up with Brandon Nimmo's contract, that's the window. I think it's a perfect marriage to continue for these guys and to go into this next window to really try to win it all.
I agree with that. Mr. Nobody saying it so succinctly. He's a homegrown slugger, which we've never had. Bring him home. And it's funny because you talk about the window. When I was on with Lori at the beginning of the week, I said that the Mets, through this Soto deal, they were in an interesting place. And you kind of talked about it a little bit with the Scherzer and the Verlander stuff. And Cohen's ownership, he takes over from the Wilpons. He's a Mets fan. He's a minority owner. He was there. He knew what the sentiment was around this team and around that ownership. He has to prove right away that he's not the Wilpons. So he goes out, he has his guys identify a player. That player is Lindor. Lindor is the first domino to fall. They trade for him. They give him the record extension for a player of his caliber and a player at his position. Then they win this 101 game, have this 101 win season. They have to double down with all the free agents they have. They got to go get Verlander. They got to do all this stuff. But this is all along while he's trying to build the infrastructure outside of the major league team. He's trying to get David Stearns, but he's getting stonewalled. None of these teams will allow him to have these executives. And what you found yourself in at the end of 2024 is a franchise that is moving in the right direction. But look, you've got Lindor in his prime, Nimmo in his prime, Diaz in his prime, Senga in his prime. You've got a couple of young pieces in Alvarez and Vientos that have shown a lot of promise, but you hope that they continue to grow in that way. You don't have Pete Alonso, at least not right now. And so they're in this position where their window may have been closing before it was ever really fully opened through no fault of their own. And what you do with the signing of Soto at his age and for the length of contract is you don't just reopen the window. You take a wrecking ball to the side of the house to build an addition onto it. Because Soto is great now, but he is also the perfect person to hand this franchise over to in the next 6-7 years from Lindor as you transition. So I think what you bring up with regards to lining Pete Alonso with Nimmo, that makes so much sense because you now have your window firmly open and you start to transition it into what you hope is, in the next 5, 6, 7 years, Soto, Vientos, Alvarez, and a bunch of guys who aren't even on the team yet. And to me, I think that's the perfect, you've created the perfect situation.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, this is now a team that regardless is going to be sort of locked into win now mode always with Juan Soto, but that bedrock does allow you to always have a player that can take you there. You just have to put the right pieces around him. And I think for this next 5 years, the Mets are a lot better with Pete Alonso in place and Mark Vientos at third, and that's your team. And you can always maneuver things around, but this is a time to sort of double down on what has worked for them. And I think if you look at the team that went to the NLCS, if you pull Alonso from that and just plug Soto in, it's better, but is it significantly better? If you basically make it the same lineup that got to the NLCS and now you put Soto right in the middle of it, now you're really talking about a team that is a real threat to the Dodgers. So yeah, this is going to be a lot of fun to see the first wave of the Juan Soto New York Mets. But I think the exciting thing that you're kind of mentioned there is there's going to be a second, there's going to be a third wave, going to be a fourth wave of identity that this team's going to transform with as Soto ages. I think he's a timeless bat where is he going to play right field for 15 years? No. But do I think he's going to hit for close to 15 years? I think so. You look at the Bryce Harper contract, people were really like, man, how is he going to play for 13 years? He's halfway through it, and I don't think anyone thinks Harper's going to slow down for the next 5 years. I think Harper's going to be great for most of that contract. I think the same thing with Soto.
Yeah, and look, that's another reason why, apart from the fact that you wouldn't give a player at his age and stuff this contract, but it's another reason why you sign Alonso for, let's say, 6 years. Because maybe in 6 years, Soto becomes your first baseman. You do want to leave the opportunity open for him to move to another spot. A lot of people say, like, okay, well, now, you've got the DH in both leagues. That's an option. But I don't think, in his early 30s, Soto's going to have to be a DH. I think he can easily move to first base. You take some of the burden off of him having to run around in the outfield, and hopefully that helps prolong his offensive career and his offensive shelf life. Jump back into the comments here because, man, Hunt Tough really bringing the heat, but he's saying, why you guys need pitching? Why are you worried about Alonso? Let's talk about pitching. I put out a poll on our show account on Twitter yesterday that I said I was going to ask you about. And after listening to Locked On Mets, I think I know where you're going to go with this. But Ibby and I and J Mac Customs, creator of the OMG sign, we talked about it on the show yesterday. We were all in lockstep on this. And the voters on the poll, about 200 people, gave the slight edge to what we all felt was the best opportunity. Now, in this situation, you're the Mets. You have to pick one of these avenues to address your starting pitching, and you cannot alter the terms that I'm going to put forth in front of you. And the four options are Corbin Burnes signed to an 8-year, $250 million deal, which I think based on the Strasburg contract and what Max Fried just got is about where that's going to sit. You have to give Sean Manaea a 5-year deal. Doesn't matter the AAV. It just has to be a 5-year deal. Or you're signing Nick Pivetta to a multi-year contract. Again, the AAV doesn't matter. I don't even care if it's 2 years or 3 years, whatever. But knowing that you're losing 2 picks and $1 million of international bonus signing money with the qualifying offer, or you trade the player assets to acquire Luis Castillo, knowing that that deal is essentially 4 years, $100 million with his vesting option that's tacked onto it. All in, it's basically a 4-year, $100 million deal. So gun to your head, You, Ryan Finkelstein, have to pick one of those options to add to the Mets starting rotation. Which one are you going with?
I can eliminate two off the jump. So Corbin Burns, I don't think, for one, it's been pretty evident the Mets aren't going to go there, and I wouldn't either. So I think that's the first one. Nick Pivetta, no chance for me. Doesn't make sense to give up draft picks for a guy that has not, as much as, look, I do it all the time with Just Baseball where we look into the underlying data. I know what people see in Nick Pivetta, but at some point I need the results to be there. And you're talking about a guy that hasn't pitched an ERA under 4. So no chance. It comes down to Manaea.
He's also not 27. He's over 30. So, you know, can you, even with the best pitching lab, can you unlock something? I don't know.
I think you can. And if Nick Pivetta didn't have a qualifying offer, I'd be all in. But he got a qualifying offer. So that's the difference for me. I just can't do it.
Yeah.
It comes down to Castillo and Manaea. And the 5th-year aspect makes it a little bit tough. But it's a toss-up for me. I think I would leave Manaea. And the reason I say that is because I think he really did unlock something this past year. I think if he got the 5th year, it would lower the AAV where it'd be even a little more comfortable. But to me, I would be still holding on to the prospects. Not that I'm just completely averse to trading prospects. I just feel like the Mets don't have the most capital. And when you have Steve Cohen, I'd be spending in the offseason so that you can trade in season. Because if the Mets are in the mix at the deadline, you might want to make that move. I wouldn't want to, empty the tank now for Luis Castillo when I might need him at the deadline because Kodai Senga's hurt again. You know what I mean? So I think that's where I lean Manaea, just because I'd prefer to fill as many needs as possible through free agency. 5 is as far as I go on Manaea, and I'd be much more comfortable in a 4-year deal, but I think I would lean there.
Okay, I'm a little surprised only because you were talking so much about how acquiring Luis Castillo makes a lot of sense for the Mets. But I did say you have these 4 options and you cannot alter any of the terms. And that was the thing that received the second most votes. So in order, it was most Mets fans that took the poll went with the Castillo option. The second most, by a pretty thin margin, went Manaea. And I think your reasoning is spot on, but I also think there's a little bit of he's done it here. He's our guy. He likes being here. Tribal chief, if you're into wrestling, all that stuff. I think that kind of, and also, like you said, unlocking something is if he's this pitcher moving forward, well, he pitched like an ace. He could easily be your 2. He could easily be your 1A. The third one, which I don't think surprises anybody, is Corbin Burns, because I just think people realize that, like, okay, he's a great pitcher right now. And the fourth one that almost nobody wanted was Nick Pivetta. And it is because of the qualifying offer. To me, I've said it on the show. I've said it on Twitter. The qualifying offer is the disqualifier for me. Whenever you're talking about punitive deals in terms of draft picks, other compensation, international bonus money. And this is stuff that with a guy like Stearns, he's going to use that to his advantage. I don't want to take that stuff away from him that automatically gets stripped away regardless of how much money the owner has, because he likes to deal in reclamation projects. He likes to deal in international signings. He likes to deal in drafting and developing. So I don't want to hamstring him for somebody like Nick Pivetta. Somebody in the comments said Pivetta eats innings. You already talked about his stuff and his upside. I think there's something there, but not with the qualifying offer. My worry about Burns, and I said this to a Yankee fan friend of mine who asked, why not Burns, true ace right now? You know, the last 3 years of that deal are going to be bad, but that's the cost of doing business. Ryan, I don't know if you agree with this. If the last 3 years of the Burns deal were my biggest concern, I would probably be in on the Burns deal. My worry is that he might not be the pitcher he is right now and has been over the course of his career in 2 or 3 years from now, making the bulk of that deal bad. When you look at some of the advanced statistics on Corbin Burns, it doesn't paint a pretty picture. And that's what I would be most concerned about. Not the last 3 years of the deal, but the fact that he might not be the same guy in 2 years' time.
Yeah, I mean, I looked into that too, and definitely some of the advanced metrics. I mean, they'll tell you he's not striking out the same amount of guys. He is pitching to contact more, and I personally think Burns is going to be very good for the next 3 years. I think my issue is just honestly an 8-year investment in a pitcher. It's so risky, right? One arm injury, the guy doesn't come back the same, and now all of a sudden, you could have. I mean, look at what happened with Strasburg as the perfect example. To me, it's just there's so much risk tied to it, and I guess theoretically there's that same risk in Sean Manaea on a 5-year deal. I mean, if you're talking about the timelines, they're very similar. But I think if Manaea gets a 5-year deal, you're probably talking about an amount of money that wouldn't kill you if it doesn't work out. Where Burns, if he gets more than $30 million per and like 250, he would, that could really limit you. So to me, it's just the downside is too scary. I just think it's not quite worth it. I do think he'll be good for the next couple of years if he doesn't get hurt. I'm not as concerned about some of the underlying data. It's more just the risk of injury and then the 8 years of it all.
Yeah, I see what you're saying. So it's a little bit, you're falling a little bit in between where I'm at and where, people are like, hey, just give him the money, who cares, are at. And I think that's fair. Look, I share Stern's philosophy. I said it in the first half. I've said it a lot on this show. The ROI is just better in terms of offense. And it's always better if you can get a guy when they're younger, obviously. And you said on your show that, the way the deal went for Garrett Crochet, you didn't see the Mets. You didn't see it being a sensible move for the Mets to get involved or to make the move, actually, what it cost. Look, I think I've had my apprehensions about Crochet. First year coming over as a converted reliever, potential for things just disaster as far as his arm is concerned. But the upside is you have a potential left-handed ace with electric wipeout stuff. So I'm happy that they were involved, but I also understand that they couldn't do the deal because if they had mortgaged some of those pieces, to your point, they wouldn't have them later on. The Mets have a good farm system. Our buddy Carson over at Mets Weekly Podcast, he said, they have a pity top 10 ranking where, they have a lot of quantity and there's just some other teams that are worse off than the Mets that keep them out of the top 10. So he doesn't think they're officially a top 10 farm system. So I don't know where you sit on that, but it's just interesting to see that I'm happy to see that they were interested in trying to acquire Crochet, but kind of balked at the price, or at the very least, Boston just had more to offer.
I think that's what it came down to, is just, the report came out that the White Sox would have wanted Sproat and Jet Williams. And to me, I mean, I wouldn't trade Brandon Sproat at all because he's your one chance right now, legitimately having a frontline starter that you developed. And I honestly think if you're thinking about the future with Soto and Nimmo, there's a glaring hole long-term at center field. And I think center field is the weakest position in baseball by far right now. I mean, you'd have a tough time finding 5 good center fielders that can hit and defend the position. So to give up Jet Williams,
especially if Judge moves off of it now.
Yeah.
It was
and he
Judge
wasn't
and
good
everybody
defensively.
else. Yeah.
So I mean, Jet Williams and Carson Bench, I think, are your 2 real shots at having an above average center fielder that could start for you on the cheap throughout this window to contend and to win. I wouldn't give Jet Williams up for pretty much anybody right now just because of that potential. And the Mets don't have a lot of prospects like that move the needle. And that's also where I sort of lie on the Luis Castillo trade as well. If it's going to cost Jet Williams or Carson Bench, I'm not necessarily in on it. If the Mets can pull a trade like that off with a team that's trying to contend by throwing a bunch of guys that are, closer to Major League ready, Acuna is the headliner. I mean, I'm all in on Castillo if that was the deal. I just, when you look at the market for pitching, I think the trade market as well might show, like, to get those aces, it might just cost the few prospects that the Mets can't really afford to give up. And for me right now, the 3 prospects I wouldn't trade, it's Jet Williams, it's Carson Bench, and it's Brandon Sproat. I can be talked into pretty much anybody else, but those 3 I'm holding on to right now for dear life.
Since we're talking about trades, we'll get into this kind of quickly. A lot of people are asking some form of this, but I'll bring up specifically Shay's comment because it's the most complete thought as far as this is concerned. If Pete Alonso balks at a fair offer from us for a higher offer, do you see pivoting towards Vlad Guerrero Jr. a year early? I don't. I like Vlad Guerrero Jr. I don't think he's the superstar we thought he was when he burst on the scene, although I could be wrong. He had a really nice bounce back year. I would certainly reset for Vlad Guerrero Jr. as a potential sign next year, which is why I said go short-term Carlos Santana on a 1-year deal or something if you miss out on Pete. But I don't see the point in trading assets for him. And the other thing I would say is, it's funny to me, and I'm not saying Shay or anybody in the comments is saying this, but a lot of people are like, Pete's not going to age well. Body type. Pete's not going to age well. Vlad Guerrero Jr.'s body type doesn't seem like a body type that's going to age well to me either. And I'm not trying to put a guy down and be like, oh, the guy's heavy, but it's just calling it what it is. It's weird that you would not have faith in Pete aging well, but you have somehow faith in Vlad Jr. aging well when you've already seen Pete be a more durable player.
I think Pete Alonso's durability goes completely underrated. I think I did the math on my show. It's like 26 games missed in 6 years. It's pretty unbelievable. And we've seen him get like blown up on the hand. And somehow, I mean, granted in 2023, he probably rushed himself back a little bit soon, but his durability shouldn't be questioned. I think Pete Alonso is going to age just fine. And I agree with you. Like if we're talking about, if there's a team out there, I just don't see the team. That's the other reason why I think Alonso's coming back to the Mets. I really don't see the team that gives him the offer. The Nationals jump out to me as a team that might get crazy, but I just because they don't have any money on the books, but I really don't see the team that's going to do it. If that team does exist and someone gives him an 8-year offer and you say goodbye, I don't think that you're going to trade for Vladdy. You could sign him next year, like you said, but yeah, Carlos Santana makes a ton of sense because he's a good stopgap. If Brett Beatty shows up to camp and he's awesome, then maybe you do eventually, revisit a world where you're going with just the youth. But Santana's the type of player where you can sign him and leave the room for that to happen. I mentioned Josh Naylor as a trade candidate. I think he's a guy that would thrive in New York on a contract year. So I'd be all in on that potentially because I don't think it would cost you too much for a player that's a rental. But there's a difference between Josh Naylor's price in a trade and Vladdy's price. And I don't think the Blue Jays have shown any indication that they want to trade him anyway. I don't know what they're doing. like Blue Jays are beyond me, but it doesn't seem like they're actually going to be shopping him anyway. So I don't think it's that realistic, but I don't think the Mets should be trading for him or Kyle Tucker or any of these guys that are going to cost that much to get. You can just wait them out and see if they can come to you in free agency.
I agree with that. I mean, these guys are going to get to free agency because they're looking at the landscape of free agency and where the values are going and where the prices are going. And Machiavelli says these people kill me. They want Pete, but not Vlad. Look, Vlad is great. I would absolutely take Vlad. I don't want to trade Vlad because I don't want to give up assets for him. He's going to be a free agent. I also don't think it's realistic. To Ryan's point, they're not showing any indication, Toronto Blue Jays, that is, that they're going to trade Vlad. And I just think that sometimes you need to point out the obvious of this guy's body type doesn't look great, but give me this guy on a longer deal for more money. To me, that's just not seeing the forest through the trees. So it's not a knock on Vlad. He's a great player, and if Alonso leaves, he's going to be the first player I want in free agency next year. I just don't think he makes sense right now for this team. Ibby always doing work even when he's not here. 75 in the chat on YouTube, only 25 likes. Hit the like button. Love the support. Thank you. Hit the like button if you like what you're listening to. Ryan, we're just over an hour. I told you we would do an hour, so we'll just wrap up on this thought from you. Where do you want the Mets to go now that the winter meetings are over? They got their big fish, the biggest fish in Juan Soto. I know we spent a lot of time talking about Pete Alonso. You and I both want him back. You can even omit him from this part of the conversation because of the time that we've spent on him. So where do you want them to go next? And where do you think they're going to go next? And maybe where those two things differ for you, right? It's like, head versus heart, or, fan versus host of Locked On Mets kind of thought.
So, yeah, I mean, I think a lot of the stuff we talked about today is the priority, the Alonso question, and then the top of the rotation, finding an arm there. I think one of the moves they definitely should really kick the tires on is trading for Devin Williams. That's the one that jumps out to me, where I see a real trade fit between the Mets and the Brewers. Obviously, I think, David Stearns' connection there, I imagine these teams are going to keep doing business because David Stearns can help them with their financial constraints, making moves. And you can get a player in Devin Williams that would really change things at the end of games for the Mets. If Edwin Diaz doesn't have it next year, you have a legit closer. If Edwin Diaz does have it, you have a 1-2 punch that's as good as anybody in baseball. And I look at the Brewers right now. They don't have an answer at third base. Joey Ortiz is going to slide over to short to replace Adames. The Mets have a couple of guys. They could throw Beatty and Mauricio in the same trade and give them a couple cracks at a new third baseman. And then they probably have to give up, one of their real prospects, whether that is a Ryan Clifford or Drew Gilbert. But I feel like you can get that deal done without giving up those 3 prospects I mentioned. So Devin Williams is the one I have circled. I'd love to see that happen because I'd rather the Mets trade for Devin Williams than give like Tanner Scott $60 million on a 4-year deal. That's where I think I would go next, along with, of course, the stuff we've been talking about throughout the show.
That's a really good one. I like Williams a lot. I think he could mean a lot to this bullpen. The Mets are definitely going to need some help there. This is something Death in Spades brings this up. We don't know how Clay Holmes will pan out in the rotation. He could end up as a setup man or a 7th inning guy. That's true. But I think from everything the Mets have shown thus far and to what David Stearns has said kind of point blank, they are going to commit to at least giving Holmes a full out chance to be a starting pitcher. And I do like that deal for myriad reasons. And we talked about it on this show. Look, if he is even just a 5th starter, Ryan, the $12.6 million that he has is an absolute bargain in this market, even if he's just a 5. And if he does falter and has to go back to the bullpen, either in a setup role, if they don't get a guy like Williams, or in a 7th inning role, whatever, you're really only overpaying him by let's say $1 million to $2 million in that market. So I think this was a very, very savvy move, especially on a multiple year deal from David Stearns. I know this is kind of old news, but what do you think about that Clay Holmes deal?
No, I think it's a great deal from the Mets. Like you said, if he actually works as a starter, it's going to be an incredible steal. You do have that fallback. What I love about Clay Holmes, led the league basically in ground ball rate. And you look at the home run per 9 of his career, it's 0.5. He keeps the ball in the yard. You put a great defense behind him, and I feel like Clay Holmes is going to have success. I think he has the stuff to turn a lineup over. And I think not only can he be a starting pitcher, I think there's a chance he could be a very good starting pitcher if this whole thing works out. And this is another bet on, I think, what the Mets have proven to be one of their greatest strengths now, that ability to develop pitching and get the most out of pitching. And I really do like both of the shots they've taken so far with Holmes and Frankie Montas. I think there's a really good chance they're going to get potentially 300 innings out of those guys. And if you do, I mean, that's so much value that you've gotten in a market that's really tough to find value in. So I think they did a really good job. The final piece is getting a pitcher that's better than both of those guys, and I think the rotation is set.
Do you think, and this is just Ryan's opinion, do you think Sean Manaea is notably better than both of those guys? Now, if you go by last year, he is. If you go by how he pitched last year, like I said, he's an ace. He's a 2, no worse than a 2. Do you think that is the new version of Sean Manaea moving forward that makes him markedly better than Frankie Montas or Clay Holmes?
I think he is. And I also think that the beauty of the signs they just made is those guys had the ability to do what Manaea just did, particularly Frankie Montas. Like, there's a world of Frankie Montas next year is right in the same boat as Sean Manaea is right now. But I do believe that what Manaea found at the end of last season, I think it's legit. And I was early on in the year, I was pretty critical of Sean Manaea at times where I was definitely more in the camp of liking Severino than Manaea. But once he changed for that Chris Sale arm angle, it was clear that he found something and he was just on attack mode. And I don't see any reason why he can't keep doing that. And I also think Sean Manaea, the person, is another reason why I wanted to come back to the Mets, because it was clear that it was a really good fit in that clubhouse. And I think if you're trying to bring over some of the things that went well in 2024 into 2025, it makes more sense to me to bring back Sean Manaea than even a Jose Iglesias, where I'm thinking, all right, 35-year-old second baseman who just played over his head completely. As much as we love OMG and everything else, like, is it best to sign him when you have Acuna ready to go?
No.
It doesn't make sense. So
no.
Manaea, I think it's the perfect way to bridge from last year to this year with filling a need that you have in the rotation with a guy that clearly is going to fit in like a glove. His connection to Montas even put that over the top for me as well. So yeah, those are all the things that lead me to really like the idea of bringing Manaea back.
I love that you said that about Iglesias. One of the things that the cliches that I've developed here on this show is sometimes the best part about like catching lightning in a bottle is knowing when to open the bottle and let it go. And I'll never forget when Omar Manaea signed Fernando Tatis Sr. off the scrap heap. He had a great year for us as a bench player and won, whatever comeback player of the year thing was at that point in time. And then they re-signed him to a multi-year deal after that. It's like, you just can't do that. The odds of him ever doing that again are insane. We all get attached to these people. We all love 2024. It was a super fun season. The characters, you couldn't do it without Jose Iglesias. I think there's an avenue to bring Jose Iglesias back. If maybe you trade Jeff McNeil, you give the reins to Luis Angel Acuna, but then you have a guy who can kind of be there as a veteran presence. But all of those dominoes have to fall first. I would do it. I would love to trade McNeil. I would love to trade Marte if I could. But I don't know that is going to happen. Couple quick things in the comments. Man Overboard saying you can keep Holmes all season as a starter until the playoffs. You can unleash him in the bullpen. That's a good point, especially since the Mets are probably going to use a 6-man for most of the season. Death in Spades saying, I agree. It's a solid deal all around with regards to Clay Holmes. Those are 2 new commenters, by the way. Welcome to the show. Stevie Mack said, Pete was involved in a car accident, flipped his truck over, and the guy still showed up to practice. That is spot on when you talk about his durability and his commitment. And just because I think people deserve to get their flowers, this one from Darren saying, shout out to Ryan. I watch Locked On Mets every morning and have the texting service. Ryan, you do great work. I'm so happy that you were here with us or with me today on Till Mets Do Us Part. Do you have time for one more question before I let you go?
Yeah, of course. Okay.
Because I forgot it. I forgot about it until I just brought it up now. We're talking about Jeff McNeil. I would like to trade McNeil. I would like to trade Marte. I don't know what you could get for either one of those guys. You'd have to probably pay down some money if you did. I know there's some rumors about the Mets wanting to trade Marte, things like that. Marte also pretty close with Juan Soto. Your thoughts on trading either one of those guys? I just think you need to open up some roster spots on the major league level, specifically at second base for a guy like Acuna. I don't think he's ever going to be a star. I think he might be a bright lights guy, though, with the right kind of pedigree. I think he could be a very serviceable major league player, especially with the up the middle defense when you're talking about Tyrone Taylor and Jose Siri. And then, of course, Lindor with Acuna. And then, with the improvements from Alvarez, I think you're looking at a really nice core up the middle. But I think you want to get a little younger, a little bit more athletic. And I think getting rid of McNeil, getting rid of Marte goes a long way to that. Just your thoughts on kind of those guys moving off of this team.
It was interesting today that there was 2 names that Juan Soto said in his press conference today, and it was Starling Marte and Francisco Lindor. So yeah. I do wonder about that. And I just don't know, because I spent a lot of time on the show today, this morning show, talking about Marte. I just don't know what team's actually going to be in on him. I mean, he's 36, hasn't played 100 games the last couple of years. I feel like he's just the Mets DH, and that's sort of how it works out for this next season. And then Jeff McNeil's an interesting one. I could see a team potentially being in on McNeil if you eat down enough money. I certainly can see it. But he gives the Mets a pretty high floor player in a lot of different positions because he's a solid defender at second base, right field, and left. And I think because of that, the Mets aren't going to be, thinking about, we have to get this money off the books. We have to eat. How much do you have to eat on Jeff McNeil's contract to make it attractive? You have to eat it down to maybe $5 million a year. It's a lot of money. And I think one of the things I talked about on my show, it was what happened with James McCann. The Mets, they ate money down on James McCann to get rid of him, and then they just turned around and signed Omar Narvaez. I would hate to see the Mets do that. So if the goal is we're going to eat down money on McNeil to bring back Iglesias, I'm just like, don't do that. But if it's because we believe that much on Luis Angel Acuna, my thought process is it doesn't really hurt you that much to have Jeff McNeil on the roster and a bench role if Acuna is that guy. I see a pathway for Acuna to play at second base, or I can see him edging out Siri and Taylor in center field potentially. So because both of those guys have versatility, I don't really feel like you have to move Jeff McNeil to make room for these guys. And maybe that's something that you ultimately decide, oh, Jet Williams is awesome. At the trade deadline, you can move McNeil, or you can cut these guys if you had to. If they don't have any value on the market, I think for now, it just gives you more depth on your roster. You can afford to keep these guys. I would just keep them and let those young guys force them out. Don't just kind of give them the keys before they've necessarily earned it. As great as Acuna was in that week filling in for Lindor, and it was a thing to behold, he was 78th out of 81 qualified hitters in that international league. He was not a good hitter for a much larger sample size. So we can't just assume he's going to be a good starter. I love the idea of Acuna on the Mets bench next year, and I hope that he does it and pushes either McNeil to the bench or one of those center fielders to the bench, but let him do that. Don't preemptively make that call is I think where I'm at.
I do agree with you in that sense. I've always said baseball is better with young, athletic, versatile players. We've kind of learned that over the last maybe 10, 15 years as it's trending a bit more in that direction, specifically, post steroid era baseball. But I do believe that these guys should have to force their way onto teams. So, I guess kind of the inverse of what I brought up of trading McNeil, bringing back Iglesias to kind of allow Acuna to have a little bit more burn at second base. I guess you're right. You kind of swayed me with regards to why eat down the money to then give somebody else a contract when you can just keep the guy that you already have. And the last question, and I promise last question, is an offshoot of that. NJ Swamp Fox says, platoon Marte and maybe sign Jock Peterson at DH. A lot of people say, well, Marte goes to DH. Marte can hit, but Marte has not shown a lot of power recently. I mean, he's not a big power guy for his career, right? He's had a couple bigger years in power department, but I don't know that you need a DH with power necessarily, especially if you bring back Alonso and you get power out of, you're getting power out of Lindor, you're getting power out of Pete, you're getting power out of Vientos, you're getting power out of Soto, and you might have power out of Alvarez, or at least you hope. You don't necessarily need power out of that DH spot, but do you think that Marte can be a viable DH? And if not, where do the Mets go? Is it Marte and Jock Peterson? Is it Marte and Jesse Winker bringing back that guy? Like, DH seems like a little bit of a black hole since the National League has adopted it for the New York Mets. They really can't crack it.
Yeah, I think if you bring Alonso back, I'm okay to have Marte as the initial guy, and then you leave room for other options. If Brett Beatty actually shows us something, he might be your third baseman. Vientos might be your DH. If Ronnie Mauricio comes back and he actually is really good, that could be the option. I think Starling Marte, if you make him a DH only, you get him out of the outfield, you might be able to keep him healthy. And we saw in the playoffs, he was still giving you a really good at-bat. And like you said, if you bring Alonso back, I think that's all you need. If the Mets don't bring Alonso back and they're going for a stopgap, then I'm more of the camp of, go out and get somebody like a Jock Peterson to be the DH to make up for some of that loss of power. But if they have Alonso in place, to me, I'm fine with Marte at DH and just letting it sort itself out throughout the season. Because if anything, if the Mets really need to fill that hole, if that's the only issue with their lineup, it'll be pretty easy to get an option at the deadline, just like they do with Jesse Winker, that can fill in that spot.
I do tend to agree with you there. I do like Winker. I like what he brings to the team. Of the, extra guys, if you will, from last year that I'd like to see back, I think he would be the most useful. I think when people say things like Jock Peterson, I think, it's Winker can give you not necessarily what Peterson gives you, but I think he can give you some of that. So when you talk about like Bader's obviously not coming back, but him, Iglesias, Winker, to me, Winker is the guy. I think he brings a fire. He's got a swagger. I think he fits the team. And I think more than that, I think he also does stuff on the field that you're still looking for. So he would be the one guy that I would look to bring back if the deal is right. He had a good year with the Nats. He had a good year here. He might be able to parlay that into, a multi-year contract or a starting job or something like that. So he might be gone and I wouldn't lose sleep, but I did like what Jesse Winker brought to this team. I don't know how you feel about him.
Yeah, Winker's the one for sure that I would be open to, especially, if they did find a taker for Marte, I think that would open the door wide open for Winker to come back.
Yeah.
But yeah, with Jock Peterson, you pretty much have to start him against all Rays, which is a good thing. But I think with Jesse Winker, it'd be playing the hot hand a lot. I don't think you have to force him into the lineup. He does make some sense, but I also think that there's every chance he's going to get some team to guarantee him an everyday role. And if you're Jesse Winker, I would think that's probably more attractive than uncertain playing time with the Mets, as much as you might have liked being a Met.
Shay saying Marte to Kansas City for Lucas Erceg. Lucas Erceg went at the deadline last year, a big target for a lot of people. Do you think that could get it done? I think you'd need more than Marte.
Yeah, I think you'd either have to eat down that contract entirely.
Yeah.
He's a free player, or you'd have to throw something on top to get Erceg. You're you're probably going to get an arm that you haven't heard of if you're trading Marte to anywhere. Honestly, I think that's just a salary dump.
Absolutely. Ryan, thank you so much for joining us, giving us a little bit over an hour of your time. I told you, we always go long because the conversation is good. You never know what the chat's going to bring up, and then it has a circle back to things that we either talked about or we didn't get to. So I appreciate all the extra time. Dane O. Jets, who usually watches my goddamn Jets live stream, saying, what YouTube channel is this? You're watching Till Mets Do Us Part, live on YouTube, live on Twitter, courtesy of the Brella Sports Network. Ryan, before we get out of here, one more time, plug your stuff. Where can people find you? Because you do great work. They should be listening. They should be watching. They should be following.
Locked On Mets every single day on YouTube or wherever you get your podcast, Monday through Friday. And then Just Baseball to find our written stuff, justbaseball.com.
JustBaseball.com and at Finkelstein Ryan. It's just his name reversed. It is the great Ryan Finkelstein of Locked On Mets joining us this week on Till Mets Do Us Part. Guys, this has been 4 days in a row. I know Ryan's used to it because he does a show every morning, but we're not used to it here. This is usually a once a week proposition for us at Till Mets Do Us Part. But with so much going on with Juan Soto, with the winter meetings, rumors, all this stuff swirling, Steve Cohen, David Stearns, everybody's out there talking. We had to be here with you all week, and we love doing it. We've got our subscriber base over 1,000 now, well over 1,000. We did promise that we were going to give one lucky subscriber an Edwin Diaz autographed baseball. We're going to announce the winner of that Edwin Diaz autographed baseball on our show next week, 5:30 p.m. Eastern on Wednesday. That is our regular time slot. And Manny Gomez will be joining us. He covers the Mets beat for NJ Advance. He was at the winter meetings. He is going to be with myself and Ibby on the show. We've got Ryan Finkelstein with us here this week. Thank you to everybody in the chat, everybody who tuned in live. Like the video, subscribe to the channel. This will drop tomorrow as an audio podcast, all courtesy of the Brella Sports Network. I'm John Saponaro. Matt Ibby is not here with us this week, but with us in spirit. We will see you next week. Peace.